Welcome back to another episode of the Personal Trainers Who Care podcast. I'm Vanya, one of the trainers at Freeform Fitness. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Etienne Asselin, an educator and coach who also goes by the exercise mechanic. Etienne received his mastery designation with honors with RTS International, Resistance Training Specialist in 2014. He was also Canada's instructor for RTS International from 2015 to 2019. His most recent venture is founder of the Exercise Mechanic, where he aims to educate, inspire, and empower fitness professionals to build profitable careers and help improve the lives of their clients. In today's discussion, we talked about pain and pain science. There's a lot of great takeaways for personal trainers looking to improve their knowledge in order to be able to help their clients get out of pain. But there's also a lot of concrete tools that there's also a lot of concrete tools that the average person experiencing pain can take away from this in order to help yourselves get out of pain and back to regular function. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. So Etienne, I know that one of your biggest things is challenging current belief systems and making sure that what we're doing is actually useful for whatever people are experiencing in terms of helping them get through pain and be able to move better and move more freely, essentially. I'm going to jump right in and go into a sort of maybe controversial topic.
Sure.
About what good form or ideal form means and whether that is even relevant, depending on the situation, right? So I'll start by going through, talking about a story, that I experienced with a client a few years ago. So I was working with a client, she was experiencing some knee pain, and she liked doing a lot of outdoor activities, like hiking and stuff like that, and going up high inclines was causing her some discomfort in her knees. And she was going to see a physiotherapist in addition to training sessions with me. And we were making progress, but then at a certain point I was noticing that she was kind of being a little bit too much of a stickler with how she was doing the exercises. So for instance, we were programming sort of a lot of like split squat variations, unilateral exercises, and she was like kind of obsessed almost about foot placement, how her knee was moving or not moving, and all that. So
somewhat fearful from this
exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So I kind of had to like take a step back and tell her that there is a time and place for what quote unquote ideal form is and how to move within those boundaries. But when we're looking at how we want to prepare your body for day-to-day activities like hiking and stuff, you can't necessarily rely on your body to be able to stay within those boundaries when you're out hiking.
Those like very narrow confines that we've been told within the context of fitness and training and those types of things.
So when we're doing a split squat, theoretically, you should be able to do a unloaded, just body weight split squat and have your knee go around like this and have your ankle move around with no pain. Because when you're out in Gatineau Park hiking, you step on a rock, it
maybe
falls,
uneven, for sure.
And your knee's going to be going within those different ranges of motion, right? So in order for your body to be prepared for those things, you kind of have to expect that your knee is going to be moving in, not necessarily a perfectly aligned
all the time
plane. Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. So what has your experience been like with form and getting people to kind of like move away from those conventional ideas of having to move perfectly all the time?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky because there really isn't one hard and fast rule that's going to be appropriate for every single person in every single context, every single time, right? And so the way that I like to frame things is it's not so much that there's an inherently good way to do it, but that who you are and your specific context that you bring to the table, and also the goals that you're looking to accomplish, and in which context are those goals being pursued. Like, are we talking about like a barbell sport, like powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, or are we talking about hiking? We need to look at those two things. We need to blend those two pictures so as to figure out what will be the next step in your progression. There are some people that, like, let's say this client who wants to get back to hiking, and let's say the knee going towards the midline is something that's really sensitive for them at this point in their life. It's possible that for a period of time, constraining the range of motion in which they're moving will help desensitize their body, build up some strength, etc. But then, unfortunately, what can happen, and I'm sure you've seen this, is that sometimes those rules can become a prison. And we need to make sure that we are empowering our clients with this idea that, like, you know, in the short term, this is what we're going to be working with, but that in the long run, we're going to want to give you back full function. Because your knee itself isn't just a door hinge. Like, it has the ability to bend and rotate. So if you want your knee to be good at doing knee stuff, like we want to be able to explore those things, because as you said, with things like hiking, it's almost inevitable. If anything, it is inevitable that you are going to be moving outside of what the fitness industry labels perfect form or straight or ideal stacking. Like, life is rarely ideal. And so there's an element of preparing our clients for that, you know? So it is one of those things that's kind of tricky to navigate, because there's costs and benefits to each thing that we do, and each exercise that we do is going to bias different muscles or the joints in different ways. And so it's just about figuring out what's going to be right for you at this point in your progression. And that's a really hard thing to answer. Really. But the thing that's really important, I think, is to not have fear around certain positions. Like, if we can just get rid of that fear and empower people to feel confident and to have faith in the resiliency of their bodies, that's a fundamental piece that I find that we sometimes miss in the fitness and rehabilitation space. That's something that I find personal trainers play a really big role in doing, is educating their clients and empowering them so as to not have fear, right? Because you're talking about this client that was, like, you know, almost neurotically kind of like controlling the foot position and the knee position out of fear that if some kind of deviation either towards the midline or laterally would lead to a very real problem, you know, like, we can start by just reassuring them, you know, that it's like, you're okay. And as much as this might hurt you right now, it likely won't be that way in the future. And it's just about slowly progressing you into it.
For you, what do you look for in terms of helping clients kind of like be less fearful? Is there sort of like a list of priorities that you look at and go through first?
Kind of, yeah. So I would say, and I love that you're asking this question, because I've been thinking about this a lot, because I'm trying to think of, as of late, how can I distill this type of kind of thought process into a system? The first thing is our words, you know? So letting our clients know, like, yes, as much as this position is currently sensitive for you, that's not necessarily how it will always be, and that we have a lot of faith in, you know, so long as we don't do too much too fast, or, you know, too much too fast too soon, that you will have access to this position in time, and reassuring them that you can go there without damaging yourself. Because that's the fundamental thing also. People have this assumption that pain equals harm, and it's not the case. And I know you know this, but it's such a revolutionary idea that you can experience pain, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're ripping your meniscus or that you're compromising your joints. It just could be that that's your body telling you, hey, be careful, because maybe we're a little bit less prepared in that position right now. You know? And so reframing pain is the first thing that I do, because that in and of itself tends to desensitize the body. And then from there, I just strip it down to make the exercises as simple as possible and as low load and low complexity, and then in time you progress those variables. So when it comes to the knee, do you want to like go into the details of that?
Yeah.
So an example of how this could look, if we're talking about the knee, is we need to start with, what do knees do? And they have the capacity to bend and extend, but also when the knee is bent, it has the capacity to rotate.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, in a relatively unloaded position like this one, I would see, does the client have the ability to extend and bend their knee with little to no pain? And then also do they have the capacity for transverse plane motion, so toe out and toe in with little to no pain?
Yeah.
That's step one. So do they just have the ability to move the joints in those manners in a simple manner? Next thing that I tend to do is I tend to look at, can we combine those things? Because if we look at, for instance, the position that you were describing earlier of like you're stepping on a rock and then your foot slips out and your knee kind of dives to the midline. Like this is a combination of, going into knee bending, so knee flexion, and tibial external rotation. So I tend to look at, the components. Can they go knee extension, knee flexion, and then also can they rotate it?
Yeah.
But then I look at, can we do combined motions?
Right.
Unloaded. What that would look like is, can we go, toe out while straightening the knee, and then can we go toe in while bending the knee? Like how does this feel for them? And is this provoking discomfort? If it is, then we would work this as being, our first progression in improving strength and desensitizing the knee.
Yeah.
If it isn't, then from there, what we would look at doing is saying, okay, the demands that, of, for instance, hiking are going to be significantly more loaded than doing something on the ground in a stable setting. So then I would look at, okay, well, let's start increasing load. So what that could look like is getting them into some kind of staggered stance, getting them to go through initially like simpler exercises, like just knee flexion, knee extension.
So
and
again,
then
staying within a confined boundary first and then slowly
Correct. And so looking at like simple exercises like knee bending, knee extension, knee out, knee in, knee out, and then combining it kind of like we did on the floor.
Yeah.
So as you can, so we're looking at the components and then we're just looking to progressively increase loads and then complexity. And then the last few components of that would be, all right, well, let's get you doing, for instance, like going into knee valgus perhaps like really rapidly and then coming back out of it, So there's a lot of ways that we can start tailoring exercises and kind of deviating from this notion of perfect, and we can start taking into account what matters to the client and then creating exercises that are very specific to that. So that's kind of sort of how I would organize the thought process is, do they have the components? And then we look to try to make it as specific as possible to what they care about.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to that hiking example, when you're slipping, because a rock slips from under you, it's a very quick and fast movement.
Totally.
Right? So if you're not doing things in that quick manner, you're not training your body to be prepared for those instances, right?
Bingo.
So sort of the thought process that I follow, kind of similar to you, is I move from as controlled of a, environment as possible, and slowly add more layers of uncontrolled or more chaos.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I love that you're bringing that up because like there's some things that we can do. Where, I don't know if you've played around with this, but like having a band, like perturbing them, right? Yeah. So like as they're going through their exercise, like pulling their knee in.
Yeah.
In a way that is chaotic and unpredictable, and then it forces the client to develop that skill, and then ultimately they foster a lot of efficacy, and I find skill is a really important word here. They foster efficacy and skill and strength so that they can go do all of the things that they care about without provoking pain, right? And and so that's the beauty of deviating from this notion of perfect form, is that once again, life doesn't happen necessarily in these ideal contexts, and we can create very specific things in the gym so as to make people more resilient.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's not to say that there isn't a time and place for being confined in those constraints of what perfect form is, right? When we're adding load and building strength, you don't want your knee to be moving around in different positions when you got like 200 pounds on your back.
Totally. Yeah, like if you want to like really work your legs, it might not be the strongest, to like squat in this type of manner, right?
No, exactly. So,
that's why context is so important.
For sure. What would be your advice to a regular person out there experiencing pain? What would be their like sort of first step?
Would be their first step. So
come see one of us.
Yeah. Go see freeform trainers. All joking aside, one thing that I really value and love about the freeform organization is you guys are very continuing education focused, and that's something that the client sometimes doesn't see. But that you guys as an organization encourage your trainers to learn. So that for me is like it's the opposite of a red flag. It's a green flag. It's a really great sign. So yes, go see a freeform trainer. But so the first thing I would say is I would reassure them that you're going to be okay. Your body does millions, perhaps billions. I'm not sure. I'm not great at math, but your body does millions of processes outside of conscious awareness. Cells are always turning over. Your body's always in this process of healing and pruning things that aren't good and creating things that are. And so, the whole process of pain and healing tissue is no different. And as much as things hurt now, have faith that your body will, like it always has, that it will be able to figure this out. So long as you create a context that promotes healing. And so some of the variables there are, once again, number one, not having catastrophic narratives about pain and having faith that your body will figure it out. And then just own what you can. You can't force yourselves to turn over, but what you can do is you can sleep well, you can perhaps control your stress levels, you can eat good food, and then let your body kind of take care of the rest. In addition to that, I would say start exercising in a manner that is not reckless. Like don't do too much too fast. Slowly start exposing your body to stressors after you've given it time to relax or rest. And in doing that, we can usually encourage the body to come back stronger, and we can encourage the area to be less sensitive faster, usually through exercise. There's seemingly a lot of really good evidence that exercise is really useful when it comes to pain management.
Yeah, I guess that's the perfect segue into pain science.
Let's do it.
Which is, a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate you because you were kind of like the first person to introduce me to this whole new world.
Really?
Yeah, when you did
amazing.
Our workshops last year for us.
Cool.
I think intuitively, I kind of like came to my own conclusions that, what we're taught isn't necessarily the end all be all of what pain is and stuff like that, just with things I've observed working with clients over the years.
Yeah.
What is pain?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
So
there's my favorite definition of what pain is comes from a researcher out of Australia, Lorimer Mosley, who I believe we chatted about in that course that you mentioned, which is that pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience that is associated to actual or potential tissue damage. And I think that's the exact quote, and if it is, I'm gonna pat myself on the back. The thing that's really cool about that, so he says pain is a sensory and emotional experience, which we would agree, like pain sucks, it's not fun, it hurts, it's definitely not pleasant. But the really powerful thing about that quote, and this is coming from like a leading researcher in this field, is that pain is associated to, not caused by, actual or potential tissue damage. So pain is associated to actual damage. That I think we all kind of understand. You get a paper cut, like you'll feel that. But pain is also associated to potential tissue damage, meaning there's cognitive, subconscious processes that are future-oriented, that aim to predict when we may damage ourselves, and pain is created to alter behavior, right? So that's kind of what he's talking about in that quote. So it's an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience that's associated with actual or potential tissue damage. And based on the time that I've kind of spent looking at this stuff, it seems like more often than not, other than when there's an acute injury that happens and we're completely taken by surprise, most of the pains that we experience are aimed to prevent future harm or further harm, right? So like if you injure, let's say you roll your ankle and let's say you sprain a ligament. The model that we're kind of looking at now to conceptualize why our ankle will hurt is that there's a compromised ligament and the brain is telling you, hey, be careful, don't put as much load through this ankle in this type of manner, walk differently, and it creates a limp so that the tissues can heal and that we don't compromise that ligament further, right? And the reason why we're looking at it in this way is that, and I'll use a different example that's just very real and relevant. I was talking with Greg Lehman not too long ago. He's a Canadian physiotherapist, also recognized on a fairly large scale for his understanding of pain and rehab. And he was using this example that, if you break your shin or if you get like a fracture in your shin, it takes a long time for that to heal. And usually, like the way that it'll work is you'll have shin pain, you go to get an exam, let's say, and then let's say they put you in a boot of sorts. Yeah. Shortly after putting your leg in a boot, your shin won't hurt anymore. But it's not that the bone has healed within a matter of a week or so. The fracture is still there. But because there's a protective strategy around the shin, the brain or the nervous system doesn't feel the need to create pain so as to alert you of the problem. So you'll have no pain in your shin, even though the bone is still, quote unquote, broken or compromised in, to some degree, right? And so that's just one of many, many, many examples where there's a very real orthopedic problem in the absence of pain. And then if you start stressing that leg too much, then you'll start getting feedback about like, hey, careful, what you're doing might exceed the tolerance of the area. So that's the big reframe with pain, is that there isn't this causal relationship between the pain experience and damage. And at least in my experience, and I don't know if you can attest to this, but understanding that is actually really liberating because you can experience discomfort without it being this catastrophic thing of like, oh my gosh, what did I just do to myself? And you can just be like, no problem, I'm going to just decrease the stressors, whether it be speed, complexity, load, total volume within the context of a week, even emotional load. Like, if you're going through a really hard time and your body feels terrible, like you can be like, all right, well, what's all this stuff that's going on in my life and how can I control those other non-physical loads? And that can just help your body hurt less, So I don't know, I find pain science is really liberating. And the thing that I will say, just to kind of bring it back to the power of the personal training industry, is that this is something that we've known for a long time, kind of intuitively, where like if a client comes in with a like knee pain or a meniscus problem, and we end up helping them, we're not fixing their meniscus, yet they feel better. And so that doesn't make the work that we're doing any less relevant. It shines even further light on the power of movement and a well-structured exercise plan.
So essentially, pain is basically a warning sign, not necessarily a signal that something is actually wrong.
Correct.
It's just telling you, okay, you have to do something to kind of like back off so that, things don't get worse.
Based on our perception of threat. And so this is where it's like, back off, maybe, right? So this is where like your upbringing and your conditioning plays a big role in this. If you were brought up in such a way to believe that you're fragile, it would make sense that your body would be protective and maybe a little bit less willing to be challenged. That's one of the things that's, once again, great about training, is that we can show our clients through various exercises and contexts that we create that they're actually stronger than they thought they were. And the ripple effects of that are immeasurable. Like I have one client who her whole life has just been plagued by pain and injury and all these things. And then she was diagnosed as being hypermobile and all those things. And she was told, like, don't deadlift, don't do all these things because, if you deadlift, your back will break. And she believed that. And so you can imagine how that notion and that idea of like her fragile spine robbed her of living a fulfilling life you know, and doing things that she found interesting and meaningful. And then we started training, and she did a deadlift with low load, but she was like, oh my God, I can do this. I'm not as fragile as I thought I was. And that was like one set, you know, and it was completely paradigm shifting for her, you know, so yeah. So anyways, exercise is very powerful, but yes, just to kind of bring it back to the whole pain science thing that we're talking about, is pain isn't necessarily indicative of harm. And understanding that tends to be very freeing for people.
Yeah, that whole liberating feeling is huge for people.
Yes.
Like, you know, I have a lot of clients who are older, 60s, 70s plus, and, you know, I see a huge difference between my clients that I work with and then, you know, other people's in their age group that don't necessarily exercise, right? So they look older for one thing, but they don't move as well, and maybe they're fearful of you know, being able to do all the things that they should be capable of doing, right? And it's amazing to see when somebody who hasn't done training in that age range, and I start working with them, and it's like, oh, I didn't know I could do this.
For sure.
And it's like all of a sudden, they have all these possibilities that have opened up to them. You know, they don't feel confined, right? And they can, you know, they're just like experiencing the world again. In a whole new light. So that's always amazing to see.
And this is why I love what we do, right? Because we can quite literally help people get their lives back and rediscover their sense of agency through just getting them moving in a manner that is strategic and appropriate and thoughtful. You know, because, you know, just because pain isn't necessarily indicative of harm doesn't mean that that client who's 70 or 80 that we should put a 200-pound bar on their back. Like, we do need to be cognizant of what their current limits are, whether they be structural and tissue-based, or even just the very real limits of what the nervous system deems threatening or not. Like, we have to respect that and work within it. But when we do that, and what the person thought they could do goes from this kind of narrow-ish circle to them doing more and more and more and more, it's incredible how they can get their lives back, you know, like to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying there. One of my clients stopped dancing like 25 years ago because she was told her spine was arthritic, and it is, and that's, you know, it's just the truth of her back. And but what that led to was her being like, well, I can't wiggle anymore. You know, no more wiggling, no more shimmying, because when I do that, my spine moves, right? And so she was, I won't say robbed of, but based on the inputs and the feedback that she got, she stopped dancing with her husband, which was like the thing that like added life to her life, you know, like she loved doing that. And then through training, we started exploring some of these positions with way higher loads than what she would normally experience with dancing. And she's getting back to doing these things that she loves, you know? So, and we didn't change anything about the arthritic nature of her back, just to be very clear, right? It's just that, you know, reassuring people that they can do these things is such a big part. And that's why, you know, one of your earlier questions, which was like, okay, where do we start? It has to start with educating our clients. That's why I love that we're doing this, and hopefully your clients will see this as just further reinforcement that they can do the things that might right now be uncomfortable for them. You know, there may be very real discomfort that they're experiencing, but that doesn't mean that it will always be that way. And that when we do things strategically, methodically, that people can get back the function that's been, you know, that is perhaps not accessible at this moment. You know? Yeah,
exactly. And yeah, going back to what you said of, you know, about how pain doesn't necessarily equal harm. It kind of goes the other way as well, right? You know, actual tissue damage doesn't necessarily lead to pain either. Because, there's been MRI studies done on Asymptomatic individuals, so people who don't experience pain,
Yep.
that show, a lot of them, they have stuff wrong with them. So your client who had...
wrong in air
yeah,
quotes.
yeah, exactly.
Wrong in air quotes, yeah, for sure.
So like your client who had arthritis in the spine,
Yep.
Having that arthritis doesn't necessarily mean she should be limited.
Totally.
And be living through pain.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really powerful. So like, for every single person that comes in and they're like, my back hurts, and I got the scan, look, and it says that I have like degenerative disc disease. I have this disease, and associated to the discs shrinking over time. But like you mentioned, when we look at the literature, when we look at the data, those changes seem like they're more age-related, and they don't have a causal relationship with pain. And yet, very often, they're used as scapegoats, right? Someone comes in with pain, and we see something that deviates from quote-unquote normal. And I think normal is, often analyzed through the lens of like youth. So normal equals perhaps how it was when you were younger. And we don't take into account that there's normal age-related changes that don't necessarily cause pain for people. But then we pathologize them. And we make them abnormal, right? And so that's why I find like putting it into air quotes is really important, because some can be like, yeah, my spine's arthritic. And I'm like, yeah, most people are arthritic because we're living longer. So most people have some degree of spine arthritis, hip arthritis, knee arthritis, shoulder, and it's quote unquote normal for some of those age-related changes to happen. The caveat here is that it doesn't mean that they're not important, and they can be kindling to like the fire, so to speak, but kindling in and of itself isn't sufficient for pain. And so that's the important reframe, And so for every client that comes in that is like, I've got, my back hurts, and because it's broken, I've got degenerative disc disease.
I got a rotator cuff thing.
I got a rotator cuff thing. I have a torn labrum or something. You can be like, okay, cool. And in our minds, we know that that isn't necessarily the death sentence, so to speak, of the things that they find interesting and meaningful. It's just that currently the hip is sensitive, or the back is sensitive, or the shoulder is sensitive, and we can desensitize them over time.
Yeah, and like, we're both in our mid-30s, I guess.
Maybe. Maybe. I do have a baby face. Yes, mid-30s.
Right. So based on literature, the likely, I don't have any pain. Do you have any pain?
Not right now. Not right now. No.
But based on the literature, the likelihood that we have something that's like less than ideal is pretty high.
It's like almost inevitable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's likely that we have like some kind of herniated disc or degenerative disc disease on the spectrum. It's likely that it's there, and we feel totally fine.
No, exactly. And there's nothing stopping us from doing all the things that we do and exercising, and
that's it.
Yeah. So it's all about letting go of that fear of something being wrong and it leading to pain, and that you have to stop doing stuff.
The big thing that it comes back to, and it's it's not a really sexy answer, but it seems to be really true, is it's like one of the biggest provokers of pain is doing too much too fast or too much too soon. That's really what the vast majority of the literature is pointing to. And so it's once again, it's very liberating, because we can say, okay, if I'm in this for the long run, all we're going to want to do is make sure that we are slowly progressing the body over time and taking care of our holistic health, so that the body can recover and not be in a very sensitized state. So it's very, I find it's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated and passionate about this topic of pain and rehabilitation and human performance, is that when we understand these concepts, it's once again very liberating for people. Because the fear thing just goes away.
Yeah, exactly.
And we gain agency over it.
And as long as you're following the right steps, slowly adding more complexity, more load, more challenges to your body, and an appropriate, inappropriate stages.
Yes.
All it takes is time, right? And having that trust that eventually you may be out of pain. You don't have to be stuck where you are all the time.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And and there's one thing that we didn't touch on that I think would be useful, not only for the freeform clients, but also for the freeform staff. It's this question that, once again, I was talking to Greg Lehman about it not too long ago. And it's fundamentally, when someone comes in and something's hurting, the big decision that we need to make is, at this point in time, do we need to protect the area, meaning decrease the stimulus on it because currently what we're doing is too much? Or are we in a phase of exposing the body to stressors and building it up? That is kind of the binary decision that at some point with every injury or every ache and pain that we have, we kind of need to make that call. Like, okay, are we going to protect it because maybe it was something that happened that was too much and kind of exceeded our capacity? Or are we in a stage of, all right, let's build this, let's build this things up? Usually with acute pain or injuries, you're going to want to protect and then expose. Usually when it comes to more persistent things like 3+ months, or even to be really safe, 6+ months, if it's still hurting, you're usually going to be looking at, okay, you know what, things have healed enough and yet you're still hurting. So let's start exposing the body to stressors and building it up and desensitizing it. The thing to hammer home for the trainers and for the clients that are currently experiencing discomfort is that this notion of hurt doesn't necessarily equal harm. And that pain is about protection. And this is the big theme. Pain is always about protection, and it is not about damage. So then it's just about, and so it's far less catastrophic, and so if there's one thing that people can gain from this conversation, hopefully it's that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Etienne, let's finish off our conversation with talking about your most recent venture, the exercise mechanic, where your aim is to educate trainers on everything that you've kind of discussed with us today. How to deal with pain, what pain means in general, and how to help their clients get out of pain. So why was that important to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason why it's important is that what we do is important. And that fitness professionals have a huge reach and a tremendous amount of influence in our clients' lives. Like and for that reason, we need to, I think, know these things so that way we can have really positive influences in our clients' lives. There's this, I'm not a huge geek, I'm a little bit of a geek, and there's this quote from the Spider-Man series where Ben Parker says, with great power comes great responsibility. And when you think about, as trainers, like for instance, the freeform staff, how frequently do they on average see their clients per week or perhaps per year? What do you think?
Per week, average would be 2 to 3 times.
2 to 3, so let's say 2.5, right? So over the course of a year, that's maybe 90 to 100 sessions, depending on vacation and sick days, right? So you think about that amount of time in comparison to the amount of time that those same people will see the rest of their health team, like the total time that they'll spend with their physician, their chiropractor, their massage therapist, etc. What we do eclipses the amount of time that that person will see the rest of their health team. So there's the time piece. And then in addition to that, because of the kind of informality sometimes, that we get to lean into with our people, there's tremendous relational depth too. So we have power because of the relationships that we foster, and we have a ton of time. And so because of those two things, we have a huge amount of influence in our clients' lives. And so bringing it back to that Spider-Man quote, with great power, with great potential influence comes a great amount of personal responsibility. So that's why I'm looking to share this type of information with fitness professionals. It's because we have a huge amount of influence in our clients' lives. That is the motivator. It's so that we can have positive, impacts in the lives of our clients.
Yeah, and that relationship aspect is huge. Because something that we didn't necessarily touch on too much about pain is the effect of the social psychological factors.
Right.
And can you talk talk a little bit more about that side of things and its relationship to pain.
Yeah, so I mean, it's tricky. These social and psychological factors. Can you give me an example, or is there something specific that you'd like to touch on there? Because that's kind of that's a pretty big topic.
Yeah, so things like stress, anxiety, people who tend to suffer from more mental health issues such as depression. I have noticed that they experience pain,
right,
a little bit more acutely than maybe other clients that I have.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah. So earlier we were kind of talking about this notion that orthopedic changes in and of themselves are insufficient for pain. It's kind of the same thing with the psychological and the social stressors that we have, but that all of those things are kindling for the fire. Yeah. So if we have two people that have the same orthopedic situation at their knee, but one person psychologically and socially is in a great state, and then there's this other person that has the same, the state of their joints, if we could do this, was exactly the same, but they had mega work stress, they had mega relationship stress, and they weren't eating foods that were agreeing with their body and all of those other things. It's very possible, if not predictable, that person would would experience pain either more intensely, or the threshold at which that they would experience pain would be less. So they'd be more sensitive in general. So, and this is once again, one of the reasons why I love this topic is that, let's say someone comes in with knee pain, if we're constrained to, oh my gosh, it's a cartilage problem, it's a meniscus problem, then we're powerless. Yeah. Like there's literally nothing that we can do. But when we start to look at it as there's mechanical things, there's psychosocial things as well, then we can say, all right, cool. So when we're looking to help your knee feel better, what are things in the psychosocial category that we can improve? Are there things like, that you're doing, like, what are your stress management techniques right now? Do you have any? And if not, by giving some to the client, that could actually help decrease the amount of kindling, so to speak, that's being added to this fire, And even the social piece, by extension of us being in their lives, we're adding social support. Yeah. So even if we're not changing anything at all, just the fact that we can be there for them and listen and, excuse my language, actually just give a shit about them, that in and of itself can have really positive ramifications just because of the psychosocial element, and they feel heard and seen and perhaps more safe in your care. So yeah, pain is complex, but the benefit of this is that there's a lot that we can do. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And can you explain a little bit more about what you meant by the threshold?
Yeah. So remember earlier we were kind of talking about this idea that pain is protective? Yeah. So if I put my hands like this, so this top hand kind of aims to illustrate the point at which very real tissue damage will occur. And then this hand down here aims to illustrate that this is the point where pain will be created by the brain. And so we tend to have this kind of buffer here, where pain will be created, but we're not actually anywhere. We're starting to get close to the threshold, but we're not actually there. So this is what Lorimer Moseley, who I mentioned earlier, calls this protective buffer. Right. And so the things that are beneath this buffer, kind of down here, this is all the stuff you get to do in your life, And so this notion of the buffer is that if someone's joint is compromised, let's say, and so this very real threshold is perhaps down here, right? And then maybe they're going through a really hard time in their life, and so their tolerance decreases, and perhaps they're eating foods that are increasing systemic inflammation in their body, and so this goes down perhaps. And so we've got this huge buffer, right, where we're nowhere near damage, and this person down here is just trying to live their life, and they keep provoking pain even though we're not actually hurting the knee, so to speak. So that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of this notion of the buffer and threshold, right? So where they're doing stuff, and if we go past this threshold, we'll provoke pain even though we're nowhere near harm.
Yeah, so the idea would be through those graded exposures that we were talking about earlier, it's to sort of help increase that threshold, right?
Bingo, bingo. So through graded exposure, we can slowly start to progress our very real tissue tolerance over time. And we can start to bring up this threshold, right? So this protective buffer either decreases and or it moves up as our tissue tolerance increases, and then we get to do more in our life.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then it also includes not just exercise, but decreasing stress, sleeping better, eating
100%.
better, all that will increase your threshold.
100%. And that's like one of the big questions that I'll ask my clients through like an initial consultation is like, we'll go through stuff, and then my goal is to empower them with like things that they can do outside of the gym that are completely in their control, that will also help with that buffer side of things. So I'll ask them, what are 1 or 2 things that you could do that would make you healthier? That's it.
Yeah.
And they might be like, maybe I should eat less popcorn. I'm like, sure.
Yeah.
Maybe I should drink more water. Great option. Sleep better, etc. All of those things, so long as we're moving in the direction of better holistic health, it tends to, it's not the silver bullet, unfortunately, but it tends to make bodies less sensitive.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, in your 10 plus years in the industry, working with a lot of different trainers, seeing how they work, what are some of the things that you would like to see the industry change, and in order to kind of like move forward and be able to offer our clients sort of that more holistic and I guess more, what's the term you use? Forget it.
So what I'm understanding or what I'm hearing is, what are some changes that I would like to see in the fitness industry, perhaps in the nearish future? Number one, I really want people to understand the power that's in their hands, especially fitness professionals and companies. I think they really need to understand the power that's in their hands that we were kind of talking about earlier because of the relational depth and the frequency. If people really understand that, we'll start taking what we do a little bit more seriously. And I think the result of that is that training will move, the role of trainers will become a little bit more clinical, as I think it should. So that's the change that I hope will happen. I hope that trainers will foster over time a slightly more clinical understanding of exercise, the process of force application, and like the personal training experience. And so, the various components of that is trainers having a better understanding of anatomy, trainers having a better understanding of force application, trainers having a better understanding of pain and the nervous system and those types of things. And I'm sure there's way more silos because I don't know everything, but those are the silos that, at least for me, stand out as being particularly relevant.
Yeah, so how does things like understanding force application benefit a client and what they want to do on a day-to-day basis?
So when the trainer understands that, we'll be able to, specifically when it comes to the force application piece, I'm going to stand up, if that's okay. Yeah. So for instance, if someone is squatting and their knees go forward this amount in comparison to this amount, right? Both of those could kind of fall into the category of a squat. But in the first example, where the knee goes significantly past the toe, in this position, there's going to be more knee extensor demands or torque or resistance at the knee. And if that amount exceeds the body's tolerance, whether it be a tissue tolerance or the body's protective buffer kind of tolerance thingy that we were talking about earlier, then it could provoke pain. And so that's the kind of overlap of mechanics and pain science, is that through exercise, other than the words that we use, we're always manipulating mechanical variables. And it's the mechanical variables that elicit tissue and also psychological and neurological changes in our clients. So that's kind of what I was getting at when it comes to the force application piece, is that if we can be strategic with force application and kind of when we can see the invisible, right? So like in the class that we did together, when we can see lines of force a little bit more and the moment arms that those create, and how much stress that will create on joints and muscle tissue, we can manipulate those things strategically so as to hopefully help our clients move in the direction of, strength and resiliency and those types of things.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to try and translate this
let's go.
The average person who may not know biomechanically what all that meant.
Sure.
So in terms of pain, why that's important is because, going back to the idea of slowly adding graded exposures to make your body more resilient to whatever it is that you need it to be exposed to. It's helpful for us trainers to understand those force application type things.
Thingies.
Yeah.
Force thingies.
Because, it helps us with exercise selection, right? Understanding what loads your body can handle right now and
Beautiful.
Understanding what the next step is.
For sure.
So, you can't just jump from one exercise to another if you don't know that your body can actually handle it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to piggyback on that. So let's say, someone, as they're picking up things at their house, they're talking to you about how this position is how they're doing it and this always hurts their knees. Well, we could, for instance, with the same load, which is the load of their body or the same amount of mass, we could get them moving in a different manner. So let's say we get them squatting and picking up things in this manner. This will stress the knee less than this in terms of the amount of load that's going to be going into the knee. So if this is currently sensitive for them, we can give them a different movement option that allows them to accomplish the task. We can build up the knee over time, and then perhaps in time we can grab one of these things and actively train this type of position where the knee goes even further and further and further over the toe. And the big thing that we're manipulating there are the mechanical variables that you were talking about. So yes.
Yeah. And then that way, when you're out there living your life, you don't necessarily have to obsess about how your body's moving. You can just move and be confident that you're not going to feel pain or think that you're going to fall apart.
That's it.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining
welcome.
me today, Etienne. Hopefully our viewers learned a lot about pain and hopefully that kind of liberates you and inspires you to kind of try different things within your limitations and hopefully over time expand those limitations.
Absolutely.
So that you're able to do whatever it is that you love and need to do and live a healthy, active life.
That's it. Yeah. Well
Right.
said.
So
Well said.
where can people learn more about you?
So if they want to learn more about me, the initiative of The Exercise Mechanic can be found on our website, which is www.theexercisemechanic.com. And it's also on various social platforms. Instagram is the big one, so at The Exercise Mechanic. Those would be the two places. If you want to follow me and, kind of like gain a little bit of insight into the weirdness of my mind, my personal account is at @Asselin_official. And I post random things like cute dogs and quotes that I find interesting and stuff like that. But if you really want to learn more about the pain science, the mechanics side of things, check out the website and check out the social page for The Exercise Mechanic.
All right.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So
welcome.
we'll see you next time. So this episode was jam-packed with a lot of information. To recap the main points, pain does not equal harm. Pain is protection. It's a signal that your brain gives your body as a warning sign to protect you from potential harm. Pain generally occurs when we do too much, too fast, too soon. When it comes to exercise, if you are experiencing pain, it may be a sign for you to reassess those three variables. So you may need to modify the load that you're using, how quickly you're performing the exercise, or the complexity of the exercise that you're doing. If you're currently experiencing pain, particularly chronic pain, know that you don't have to be fearful or believe that you're stuck this way forever. So through proper guidance, working with somebody who knows how to strategically help you build up your tolerance, you can decrease your sensitivity to pain and reduce that buffer between tolerance and pain. So if you've learned a lot from this episode or any other of our videos, please take a moment to subscribe. It really helps our channel. It's the best way to support us, and it doesn't cost you a thing. If you would like to work with one of our coaches to help you get out of pain, move better, or just get or improve your general health and fitness, please visit our website at www.freeformfitness.ca in order to schedule a free consultation. We have 5 locations in the Ottawa area if you would like to visit us in person, but we also offer virtual sessions if you are joining us from anywhere around the world. Thanks again for joining me and Etienne Asselin, the exercise mechanic, in this in-depth discussion on pain and pain science.